Hello and welcome to the Scary Storytelling Toolkit. My name is Isaac and I run Be The Bite Interactive, a multimedia studio specializing in horror narrative. I mentor industry revolutionizing horror fiction in every medium, resolving narrative issues thoroughly. This podcast is for motivation, full of evidence-based methods for mastering scary storytelling. So if you want to become instantly effective in horror, then my one-to-one narrative consulting is available now. Sign up for it in the link in the description. Just some news. I now have a paid tier for exclusive blog posts on Substack. Substack is a platform and a sort of mailing list. So I'll be posting more in-depth tools and insights to relieve the stress of meeting fan and industry expectations on there. And I'll be talking about how to sort of integrate tension, tropes, subversion, and of course narrative innovation. And again, a link will be in the description for you to sign up to that membership. I think you can either sign up for free to get the latest blog posts, or I think it's £20 a month to get the extra perks in there, and you can be a founding member as well, where I'm hoping to create an in-development feedback space for paid subscribers. And that's because I really want to drive momentum for you guys to really sort of minimize the time and energy that goes into your live projects, getting as much feedback as possible from peers in a kind of closed space. Please let me know in the comments if a feedback space is something that you're interested in, as it's something that I'm in development with. If you're thinking to make horror, I talk a lot about narrative development, tension, and mythological bedrock to make scary storytelling memorable. And I know that for some of you, information can be overwhelming in the creative process. That's why I think today's episode is going to give you a bit of a North Star. And basically, I truly believe that without emotion, that making standout horror is sort of an uphill battle. So let's break it down. Things that I'll cover are number one is having an emotional logline, and number two is a fear reference sheet. So both of these things wield you with personal power when delivering a horror project end to end. They are things that need to be planned, referenced, and iterated, but I'll be giving you more detail and back up my points with evidence as well as to why they are easy methods that should be enough really to get you started to making a scarier and more engaging horror. Relying on these tools, because they are innate to how we operate as humans, I think they'll give you breathing room and let you feel a bit more prepared to deliver the more grisly tales and outstanding narratives. And this is something I myself use in my projects, and it's making such a major difference. I'm finding it's completely removed the stress from me trying to meet any sort of expectation, and I'll get into why the fear is so important here. So when Sam Raimi was directing Drag Me to Hell, he said that he just wanted to make a movie about guilt, and that the main threat, the gypsy curse in the story, was just the mechanism to do that. And that's the thing really, starting with a trope can be fun, but the enjoyment wears thin very quickly, because running out of steam, or even lust for a lack of a better term, in creative work translates to sloppy narrative and execution. Even if you have a spellbinding idea and you're whittling away at it like a speed demon, burnout is still a risk. And that's not because you're imperfect, no, because creativity requires safety and emotional vulnerability. So leading with an emotional tie to the story, idea, or project is really what will drive you through those dark days, those tough deadlines, and of course the nitty-gritty of actually releasing something. And of course, releasing a scary story into the world is a rather bold thing to do. Those that don't like fictional terror might be turned off, repelled even. It's not a genre made for everyone. And horror by definition is the effect that the text actually has on someone. It becomes very, very personal. So the effect that the emotional tie to your work can have a major impact on the outcomes that you're hoping to achieve. And looking into this, I found a media psychology study by Barch, and they found that audiences discriminate between enjoyment and the more immediate pleasure against appreciation, which is a more deeper and finding a more reflective value. So the film scoring highest on appreciation, the deeper, more reflective value, were measured by how moving they were or how thought-provoking they were. And it became clear that films that had more of a thematic depth and character complexity scored highest for appreciation. And it's also been suggested by various brain scientists that eliciting emotional memories from art can actually tag experiences in the mind for priority brain processing and retrieval. So what this means with horror is that strong emotional ties to the work creates more brain engagement. And if you can include that raw emotive power strongly enough, then your stories can become more memorable. Horror without intense emotion creates forgettable physiological stimulation. Think jump scares and those tropey set pieces. So replay value is a great marker for return on investment, and if the audience is making deep mental connections to these stories, then it lets them recontextualize a threat across multiple viewings and playthroughs. Avoiding stress, imposter syndrome, and even money-related worries are frequent factors upon any release. By dwelling in the emotional ties to the story, not only will you find yourself more invested and more resilient, but the audience feels it too. Creative longevity is derived from balancing projects with real life. If you can appreciate your project for being an emotional outlet for you, then appreciation is going to be felt by audiences. So here's how to figure out the emotional tie to your horror project. So number one, you just want to write down what your idea is, the plot line, or even the main thread. If you have a log line, this would be really ideal. Just basically 1 or 2 sentences, or it's just something that you can sum up with your main idea for the story or project is. So I want that written down. Number 2 is to really start to think deeply about why this idea is important to you. And here you just want to jot down whatever comes to mind. Don't try and force anything. Just let your mind kind of be really free and try not to judge the things that come out. And you'll be surprised because the first things that came to my mind were totally arbitrary. And the more I dug deeper, and that's why we'll get to the next point, things started to make a bit more sense. So number 3 is repeat more interrogations into the sort of line of thinking like, but why, but why, but why? And keep asking yourself why though. Thinking more deeply until you feel truly connected with that one single emotional tie, and you'll start to feel it immediately once you kind of unravel what it really means to you. Things will really start making a lot of sense to you. And from my experience, this emotional tie could be very vague still, and not even plot relevant, and that's okay, because number 4, now this is where we work your emotional tie back into your main idea logline. And we basically do this just by rewriting the main idea with that emotional tie in. So now you should have a 1 and 2 sentence piece that not only conveys the idea of the story, but really what the story is going to be about, what it means to you. And don't worry if this is super long, because you can refine it and keep it very close to your main idea, wherever you keep that in your notes or in your plan. And that's really it. That's all you need to do. So now, even if your idea or plot changes, then just come back to this process and start unraveling again what this new idea really means to you, why you're showing up. And like I say, the work here is really just inner work, and you are linking what truly matters to a fictional idea. So next is the fear map. So this is another way we can use emotion to create compelling horror. So Shirley Jackson, the author of Haunting of Hill House, said that she was just trying to write about something that frightened her, and that is people who are alone and don't want to be, and what measures they will do to belong. So fear really enables you to grow. It's there either to hold you back or be embraced and slowly become resilient to its grip. Taking inventory of fear is going to help you make something scarier, because it's the fuel to make scares feel personal and therefore relatable. Remember, the more emotionally invested you are, the more engaging your work becomes. In various cognitive studies by Friedman Forster, fear is defined as lacking power, triggering avoidance motivation, a focus on potential losses, and a narrow attentional focus. So in essence, it's really a heightened emotion that seems to have strictly bad effects. But fear or threat, narrowing cognitive scope, which is really our sort of brain space, narrowing that can actually have benefits on both fans and creators. According to the study, fear increases analytical processing and motivation broadens the scope. So in creative contexts, things like moderate threat, like meditating on a fear, for example, under specific conditions where you feel safe and can actually make work, begins to force novel connections in your mind under that constraint. What this suggests is that fear can be a powerful tool for horror creators making scary projects. So by identifying fear in the narrative of any scary story, you can begin placing markers in your emotional environment that we're now using to force your brain to make connections. This kind of goes beyond just motivation, but it does mean that you deliver more work and more ideas with that emotional kick up the butt. If you want more insight into this, just search Freeman Forster Threat Creativity. It was a psychological study. And there's also another one, which is really interesting, by Bass, that looks at the dark side of creativity. And that tackles working with fear and anxiety willingly. And they measured strong outcomes for creative output and motivation as well. So let's try it together. Let's take a look at the current state of your story and think deeply about the reasons you decided to make this story a freaking horror story. Now, let's get a pen, paper, and just sum up as many bullet points as possible, asking yourself, what about this story really terrifies you? So listing off our fears, I started myself listing them off, and I didn't realize I was going at some pace, but getting roughly sort of above sort of 5 to 10, more than 10 would be brilliant. And if you're just starting with an idea, then just ask yourself, what terrifies you in general? What terrifies you right now? What's scary to you right now? But yeah, just try and reel off as many fears as possible, because next it's time to dial into each one and think, okay, so I've got this fear here, but what about this fear actually gives me the heebie-jeebies? What about it terrifies me? And write that down. So by focusing on this list of fears, you're the one that's taking the time that most horror makers ignore, and it should translate better to your audience. So hopefully now that you've got a list of fears, this will actually become your personal scariness guide to be referred and referenced along the way of your story. And to make the guide more useful, I suggest reordering it into a full document, actually, detailing and giving each fear a subject heading, and see if you can link things together and explore more and more in depth to these fears, because before you know it, you'll start to see some themes and also some really, really strange things as well. I know when I did this, I definitely came up with some very wild but very real fears, like don't judge me. I have put a little example on the blog for you to see, but I definitely edited out some of these things because if you're not part of my team, then I don't want you to see this. But yeah, go and check that out on the blog so you can have a clear example. But yeah, that's because really fears are so personal, and they're actually a massive asset to your story, because no one else is going to have the same fears as you. So it's worth going down the rabbit hole. And being a horror maker, this simple tool literally makes you the boss of fear. If anyone challenges your story, or if you get stuck for horror elements, just revert back to this document, to ramp up the scariness of your project. And going back to the earlier psychological reference, audiences discriminate between enjoyment and appreciation. So that means that the layers of fear that you include can glide from simple thrills to deep, meaningful fear and translate to long-lasting effects on their memory. Leaning into fear lets us generate more ideas even under pressure. So you'll be reeling off the ways you can make the story more eerie in no time. But the tool also lets you think more deeply about battles and challenges, identifying elements of the fear and so much more. I'll even encourage you to start researching and making notes on this document, because if you can make this fear feel more real, then this might be going the extra mile, but going down the rabbit hole and finding maybe some sort of case studies, some testimonials, some stories from people. I can already start seeing it being a great sort of creative tool, but also something quite frightening, and could make the creative process a bit more challenging than it needs to be. But as long as you have your fears down onto a map. From this session, I hope that you'll give yourself a big, huge hug, because it's a brave thing to be staring down at your darkest fears. But seriously, no one else is going to have thought about these fears like you have just done. And this fear map is integral to you as a maker and project at hand. It's going to be what will set you apart from every other horror project out there, because you're diving deep into fear itself, the key emotion that horror is built in and that audiences go crazy for. So hopefully now that you're bringing with ideas, it's time to stick to your guns with the emotional ties. Let's deliver raw and real scares to your audiences. And lastly, properly formatting things is a good idea, because sharing this fear map with others and the emotional tie-in as well is good when trying to get points across, but it's totally understandable if you want to keep this tool private. But if a team is informed about the emotions at stake, they themselves too might become motivated to create more emotionally charged work. So that is it for now. Thank you very much for listening. Stay tuned and subscribe to my Substack for the latest blog posts in your inbox, and be sure to like and comment below. Bye bye.